Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala nabi al kareem. In today's lesson, we're going to do something a little different. We are going to summarize and highlight some of the key lessons from the book The Impossible State by Dr. Wael Hallaq. Uh, this book is available for download in the course notes section. I know lots of people find the book difficult to follow and understand, so reading it is not necessary. Rather, this video will serve as a summary of the key lessons from that book that are relevant to this course. If you want a more detailed explanation of the book, I highly recommend the 5 video series by Imam Tom Fassini on the Impossible State, which is also available under the external resources section of this course. This book is very important for understanding the problem of modernity and how it relates to the Sharia. And it comes in at this point in our course because over the past few videos we learned about what the Sharia is, what are the goals of the Sharia, how it functioned historically, and then finally we looked at how colonization destroyed the Sharia over the past few centuries on a state and government level. Of course, the Sharia still exists in books, it still exists in personal practice, it still exists in our lives, in our hearts. But I'm talking about as a state, as a government level source of law. The Sharia is not in practice anywhere in the modern world. So, what happened? Well, the short version of it is that World War I happened. Leading up to World War I, the colonizers had taken over Egypt and India and Algeria and Indonesia, Malaysia. Many parts of the Muslim world have been colonized. The Ottoman Empire was now the last Sharia land left in the Muslim world. And they were modernizing to deal with the changing world, to have a kind of khilafat that would be suitable to the 20th century. I don't necessarily agree with all the changes they were making, but at least they had foresight, at least they were working on it. And then World War I happens, and in World War I, the Ottoman Empire loses, and the Muslim lands that were previously the Ottoman Empire are conquered by the British and the French. And again, I remind you, many of us think of World War I as part of American history or British history or European history. It is a crucial event in Muslim history. What we are living in now is the aftermath of World War I. You have to know what happened at World War I to understand where we are as an ummah. It is part of Muslim history. So the Ottoman Empire loses World War I. The Turks are only able to maintain the lands that make up modern day Turkey, and that too, the Turks that take over that land are the secular Turks who are influenced by the French, and they turn it into a secular dictatorship, the Kemalist movement, right? The rest of the Muslim lands are conquered by the British and the French, and they trying to figure out what to do with these lands. They don't want to rule it themselves because at that point in time the British and French are ruling too much land and it's become unsustainable. So what they do instead is they divide the Muslim lands in a very arbitrary manner into a number of countries, right? Into a number of nation states. Many of them very, very small. Some of these nation states have like just 2 or 3 cities. They're like really, really small. And in charge of each nation state, they put rulers who are Muslim by name, but who are subservient to Europe and later times America, so that these lands will continue to function as proxy states. They will continue to serve the interests of the colonizers, even though by name their rulers are Muslim. So here's the thing many of us don't know about history. The countries that we have today, the countries that we see in the world today, they are less than 100 years old. These countries didn't exist before. If we go back 100 years, 120 years, there's no Saudi Arabia, there's no UAE, there's no Qatar, there's no Malaysia, there's no Pakistan. All of these are new concepts. They are new concepts. The very idea of a country did not exist under Sharia. There were no countries under Sharia. There were empires, and the empires were divided into regions, and the regions were divided into cities and towns and villages, and those were divided into neighborhoods. But there was no concept of a country, of set borders, of nationality, of citizenship, nothing of this nature. This is something that is still new to the Muslim world, and something that is a European innovation that was forced onto the Muslim world. And it's something that Muslims are still trying to figure out how to live around it. What these British and French politicians did when they took over the Muslim world, besides carving out countries that are really, really small and that serve their interests, they also ensured that none of these countries had access to all of the natural resources needed to ever regain the level of power that the Ottomans had. Because understand that the Ottoman Empire, at one point in time, was the largest and most powerful empire in the world. And the colonizers had spent centuries trying to weaken that empire. And now that they had finally defeated it, they wanted to ensure that no Muslim power ever rises to that level ever again. So they divide the Muslim land into these small countries. They put their people in charge. They ensure none of these countries are independent enough to truly become powerful. And they introduce the nation-state model, which is countries with set borders and nationality, and where the government makes the law. And within the nation-state model, it became impossible to re-establish the Sharia. And that's where the title for Dr. Wael Hallaq's book comes, The Impossible State. A lot of people misunderstand it. They think that he is saying that Sharia is impossible today. No. The book is a criticism of the modern state, not a criticism of Sharia. It is actually very pro-Sharia. It shows that the Sharia provided more freedom and a better moral lifestyle than what the nation-state system does. It's actually a criticism of the nation-state. And I read the book for a second time this week just to prepare for this class. So the impossible state simply means that in the nation-state model, it's impossible to have true Sharia. This is the premise of Dr. Wael Hallaq's book. He says that the Sharia is superior to what we have today. But the current system of government makes it impossible for us to truly have Sharia in the world today. Why? Number one, the system that we have today of having countries with set borders and nationalities and citizenship and IDs and passports and bureaucracy and government making the laws and all of this is a European model of leadership that emerged as a counter product of the Christian church, right? It emerged to fight the power of the Christian church. And then it was forced on the rest of the world, including the Muslim world. Muslims didn't know of what a country was. They didn't care about such a concept as citizenship and nationality. We had an ummah, we had Darul Islam. That is our concepts. This is a foreign concept that was imposed upon Muslims. And really, the very concept of nationalism is less than 200 years old. You go back 500 years ago, nobody cared about the idea that Syria and Turkey are separate countries. They weren't. They were just separate regions of the Ottoman Empire, and there was no nationalism between these regions. There may have been different cultures, different languages, but they were one ummah. They were one Darul Islam. This concept is new, and especially for Muslims, it's less than 100 years old. I actually challenge you to go online and look for the date in which any Muslim country was invented. I don't think you'll find any that's more than 100 years old. Except maybe like Egypt, but Egypt was a region and over time it became a country. So it depends whether they're putting the starting date back when it was a region or when it actually became a nation state. I have a feeling as a nation state is very recent. But you'll find some of these countries that we think of as being around forever have only been around for like 50 years, and some of them 100 years. This is a very new concept, the idea of a nation state. And because it's a new concept, many people haven't really given thought to whether it is compatible with the Sharia. And that's what Dr. Wael Hallaq tackles when he says that it's not. Right? Because there have been, over the past 100 years, many attempts to establish a Sharia nation state. And all of them have failed. All of them. If you look at examples like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, all of these lands claim to be governed by the Sharia, but they are also nation states. And the problems that we're going to talk about today affect all of these lands. Most notably, the government makes the law, and so the government is above the Sharia. So what ends up happening is that they only bring in those aspects of the Sharia that the government likes. And if there's something in the Sharia that the government does not like, they ignore it and they make a different rule. Because nation state governments are more powerful in terms of shaping the law than the governments of the past. We had established that, for example, under the Ottoman Empire, the Khalifa had to live by Sharia. And the Shaykh Islam could pass a fatwa that this man is not fit for governance if he tries to change the Sharia, and he would be removed from his power. Such a system does not exist in the nation state model. The government is not just above the law, they make the law. And this is a severe problem for Muslims, because this is contradictory to how Sharia works. And this is why I say there's no nation on earth today that represents the Sharia. And what's become very clear is that even those individuals and groups that tried to revive the Sharia in the past 50 years don't understand the Sharia. Look at the most extreme example, ISIS, right? The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. There's nothing Islamic about how they rule that land. Their version of Sharia was a nation state in which the government forces piety upon people and applies the hudud without meeting up the standards of the hudud, who applies ta'zir, punishments to every minor sin, makes takfir of people on the most basic and silly of reasons. What we had, what they produced was tyranny. What they produced was dictatorship. What they produced is absolutely nothing like what existed in our history. There's no Sharia land in history. The Ottomans, the Abbasids, the Umayyads, the Rashidin, none of them established power the way these people did. What they established is so foreign to the concept of Khilafat and Sharia that it was a complete abomination. 99.9% of Muslims rejected it and could not understand what they were doing. How did such an abomination come about in the name of Sharia? I believe it's, number one, a result of modernity itself. It's a result of not educating people on what Sharia is, what the Khilafat is, what Jihad is, how the hudud are established. And it's a result of not being able to think outside the nation-state model. That's another thing, not being able to think outside of this model. And so the idea of Sharia is not a Darul Islam, but a state. But we'll talk more about them in the next video when we talk about revivalist efforts over the past 100 years, which is what the next lesson will be about. For now, let's talk about why does Dr. Wael Hallaq say that it is impossible to revive the Sharia within the nation-state system. Well, Dr. Wael Hallaq highlights 5 features of the nation-state that makes it incompatible with Sharia. It's very interesting, right? He says basically there are 5 key features of a modern country that makes it incompatible with Sharia. Number 1, this whole system is a product of European history. This is a European model of governance and leadership being imposed upon the East, being imposed upon the Middle East, being imposed upon the rest of the world. It's not going to work outside of Europe, and I would argue it's not even working within Europe, because Europe right now is falling apart. This system failed them, and it's definitely going to fail the rest of the world. But even within the context of Europe, you understand why this model came about. When you understand the tyranny and the dark ages and the ridiculous level of control that the church had over people, you understand why Europeans went in a different direction for leadership. Nonetheless, this whole concept is foreign to the Sharia. We never had an idea of countries. We never had an idea of nationalities. We never had an idea of set borders. We had Darul Islam. Yes, Darul Islam may have been divided into multiple empires. You may have had the Mughals and the Ottomans and the Safawids and the Mamluks all ruling at the same time over different regions. But these weren't different countries. They were different regions. They all still followed the same Sharia. You could still migrate from one to the other and life would be the same. There were no set borders. There was no passports or visas. It was one Darul Islam with different kings. That's all it was, different kings, but the law remained the same. That is what the Sharia produced. What we have today is what the Europeans produced and imposed upon us. Number two, and really this is the key reason why the Sharia and the nation-state system are incompatible. In the nation-state system, sovereignty or lawmaking or power, absolute power, right? Absolute power belongs to the state. In Islam, absolute power belongs only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does this mean? In the current system that we live in, the state has a level of power that's untouchable. Think about it, right? The government, if they don't like you, they can freeze your passport. They can freeze your bank account, right? They can cancel your ID. They have a level of control and power over you that is absolute. If you become a threat to the system, they can oppress you in ways that are unprecedented in human history. They maintain the illusion of freedom, but there's no real freedom. They are the power in totality, absolutely. And they will wield this power when they feel they need to, or when they feel that people are starting to question their power. They control everything, from education to economics to bureaucracy to making of laws to even what we consider moral and immoral. All of it is dictated by the state. Think about it. In the nation-state system, they even control what you think of as moral and immoral. So if you're living in a nation-state where they arbitrarily declare the age of adulthood to be 16, and you grow up in that nation-state, you grow up believing that it is immoral for an 18-year-old to marry a 15-year-old, right? But if you grow up in a nation-state where it's 18, it becomes immoral for a 19-year-old to marry a 16-year-old. So even the concept of morality is controlled by the governments. In Islam, everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the only absolute power. He is the only one who has absolute control. He is the only one who has absolute authority. The king, the sultan, the khalifa is at the service of the people. He is a representative of the people. His job is to ensure protection of the borders and that people can live by Sharia, and that you have just people as governors and as qadis and as muftis. Other than that, he stays out of people's way. He does not get involved in the average person's life. He is not a dictator over the people. He is someone who is there to represent the people. It's a very different system. Under Sharia, the government does not have control over what the ulama say. And we know under Muslim nation states today, they have complete control over what the ulama have to say. You have one opinion they disagree with, they will throw you in jail. That is not Sharia. That is the tyranny of the state. And so this is a matter of complete incompatibility between Islam and the modern nation state system, one that you could even say is kufr. This could even reach a level of kufr. Right? It could even reach a level of kufr where if someone considers the state's power to be absolute compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, then this could be kufr. But of course, no one thinks on that level, but theoretically it could get there. This translates into the third problem. The third problem is that the state has absolute power over lawmaking and violence. There are actually two separate issues that Dr. Wael Hallaq puts together. When it comes to lawmaking, we already established that in the Sharia, the law is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama interpret the law. The qadis carry out the law. The khalifa simply facilitates all of that. He has no say in what the law is unless he is an alim himself, which was very rare, right? Besides the Khulafa Rashidin and Umar bin Abdul Aziz, we didn't really have ulama as khalifas. So for 99% of our history, the ulama interpreted the law, the qadis enforced the law, the khalifa just stayed out of their way and just paid their salaries, right? He just gave them that legitimacy by hiring them and paying them their salaries. But he had no say in what the law was. And now we see this clash in the modern state where the ulama are powerless. They are at the mercy of the state. And if they have any opinions that the state disagree with, they are thrown in jail or they are killed or they are tortured. This is happening in Muslim lands today on a level that is unprecedented in our history. Now you may go back and say, hold on, wasn't Imam Abu Hanifa put in jail and wasn't Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal put in jail? Yes, but those were shocking events because they were so rare for that time. Right? Those were shocking events because they were so rare for that time. Today it's the norm. Today it's the norm that if you don't say what the government wants you to say, you go into jail. So the ulama are no longer the interpreters of the law. They are just puppets being controlled by the government. Furthermore, the governments don't really take what the ulama say seriously anyway. So if you look, for example, is there a Sharia land today where riba is outlawed? Where there is a ban on a riba-based economy? No. Why? Because the government makes the law, not the ulama. And so the governments control the law. And linked to that, governments have a monopoly over violence. One of the lies and the tricks of modernity is tricking people into thinking that we have less violence in the world today than we've had at any point in history, and tricking people into thinking that religions cause the most violence and that modernity and atheism and secularism has done away with violence. In reality, violence in the past 100 years has been at its worst, at its peak. But it's all done in the name of modernity, so it's fine. Think about it. They would say that for Muslims to fight jihad fi sabilillah is barbaric. But for them to bomb democracy into a country, oh, that's just civilizing the people. You see, there's a lot of violence in the world today, carried out by these nation states, in both the West and the Middle East and everywhere else. But it's all done in the name of civilizing people. It's all done in the name of democracy. It's all done in the name of secularism. And so it's justified. Drone strikes, tortures in prison, and all of these kind of things are ongoing every day in many parts of the world. The states today have a complete monopoly on violence and people are powerless in fighting back. Historically, there was some checks and balances here. Historically, if the Khalifa would get too tyrannical and violent to the people, there would be uprisings, right? As in the case of when Karbala, right? Karbala is a good example of this. When Yazid did not punish the leaders of Kufa for killing Hussein and the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, the people of Medina rebelled against him. And Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu anhuma declared himself the Khalifa. And he fought the Umayyads for 14 years. Look at this, look at the difference, right? In modernity, if the government had to execute a righteous man for voicing his opinion against them, there's absolutely nothing that people can do about it. At the most, they might protest a bit and then go home. But under the Sharia model, when we had our first tyrant, Yazid, what did people do? Did they sit back? No, they literally waged war against him, declared themselves to be Khalifa, and fought him and fought his family over the injustice. And this happened many times in our history, that when injustices were done, people will rise up. They would fight back. They would not allow the ruler to get away with such levels of violence. There were checks and balances from both sides. The Khalifa kept people in check, but people also kept him in check. Today, all violence is controlled by the government. The army, controlled by the government. The police, controlled by the government. Prisons, controlled by the government. War, handled by governments. They control everything. And so they have a monopoly over violence, and the rest of society is actually powerless. There's nothing you can do if your government chooses to oppress you. That's the scary reality of the nation-state system. There is nothing you can do if your government chooses to oppress you. If they don't want to give you a passport, guess what? You're stuck. If they freeze your bank account, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. If they decide to declare you an enemy of the state and throw you in prison and torture you, there's absolutely nothing that can be done about it. This level of monopoly over violence is tyrannical and unjust and un-Islamic. That brings us to the next aspect. Dr. Wael Hallaq argues that modern bureaucracy is also contradicts the Sharia. Like I said, if the government wants to deny you a passport, there's nothing you can do about it. If they cancel your citizenship, what happens if someone becomes stateless? Like the country they are born in cancel their citizenship and no other country gives them citizenship. This is actually something that can happen in the modern world. Modern bureaucracy has become a way of controlling people through IDs, passports, visas, and all of these other things. Centralized banking, all of this has become a form of control. So you know the government's in charge, and you have no choice but to listen and to obey and to hope that they never take these documents away from you. This contradicts the freedom of the Sharia. Under Sharia, there was no to minimal bureaucracy. There wasn't that much paperwork. Yeah, maybe you need a marriage certificate and some proof of property ownership. That's probably as far as it goes. Right? Otherwise, there's no real bureaucracy in place. There's freedom. There's no ID system. There's no passport system. There's no visa system. If you want to move to a different part of Darul Islam, there's absolutely no paperwork that needs to be done. The government, for the most part, stayed out of people's lives. Bureaucracy is another way through which they control people today. And the final thing that Dr. Wael Hallaq mentions is the concept of culture. Under Sharia, we have a diversity of cultures. And these cultures interact with each other in a very friendly manner. So Muslims travel from one region to another and they embrace and enjoy the diversity of cultures. And they adapt to the culture of the region that they move to. And they understand as a ummah we are culturally diverse. In the modern state system, culture is often used as a way of othering people outside of the borders. So historically, for example, you may have a region that for over 1,000 years in that region, people spoke the same language, they had similar cultures, they followed the same religion, they looked similar to each other. The British come in, they draw borders between these regions, and they tell the people on either side, you are now different countries, you don't like each other. Nationalism is created, And they now see people on the other side of the border as a different culture, as an enemy, as someone to hate. While in reality, there's very little that's different between them. Now, to make it seem like there's something different between them, culture becomes a part of the nation state. That the nation state starts to say, this is our culture, that is their culture. Our culture is good, their culture is barbaric. And this becomes a way of creating loyalty to the nation state, driving up nationalism, and also creating animosity to the other. And we see this today, right? Amongst Muslims all over the world, there's a lot of xenophobia, there's a lot of hatred for other Muslims. There's this idea that, oh, they are barbarians, they are backwards, they are from that country, you can't trust people from that country. And it's all because of where you're born, which part of the world you're born to. That's enough for one Muslim to hate another Muslim. This goes completely against the sense of ummah. This goes completely against the benefits of cultural diversity. As a Muslim, you should never think in terms of nationalism. As a Muslim, you should never think that just because someone's born in a different country, a different land, automatically they are bad people. You shouldn't think that just because someone's culture is different, they are automatically bad people. This is a product of the nation state that is incompatible with the Sharia. We spoke earlier about how the Sharia created a Darul Islam that was made up of many different cultures, all of which complemented each other and were celebrated. Today, the Muslim world is divided into nation states that see people with different cultures as foreign and alien and even as enemies, even if they're also Muslims. So this is the core of Dr. Wael Hallaq's argument, that because of these 5 reasons, the nation-state system is incompatible with Sharia. It's a European system, not an Islamic system. The government has absolute power instead of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having absolute power. The government controls the law instead of the ulama interpreting the law. The government has absolute violent control over any opposition. The government controls the citizens through its bureaucracy and its control over the culture. Many people don't know about all this. Many people don't understand all of this because this doesn't affect many of the average people in the day-to-day lives. You see, if you're someone who just lives the average life, you just go to school, go to university, get a job, work, marry, have children, go old, retire and die, then none of this really affects your life. You won't even realize all of this is going on. But if you're someone who have your own opinions, if you are someone who's critical of the state, if you are someone who's critical of the bureaucracy, if you're someone who's seen somebody else oppressed because of any of this, then suddenly all of this becomes a reality to you and you realize that the freedom of the modern world is an illusion. In reality, we are living in a point in time where governments have a level of control and power that was unheard of in human history. At the same time, they were able to trick people into thinking that we have more freedom today than ever before. So these are the problems of the nation state. Just to reword them in my own words, so those were the 5 features of the nation state as mentioned by Dr. Wael Hallaq. Now in my own words, what are the problems with the nation state that emerge from this that make it incompatible with the Sharia? Number 1, in the nation state, the ruler makes the laws, not the ulama. Ulama actually are kind of completely sidelined in the modern world. Yes, some of the countries that claim to be Sharia lands like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan may prop up some ulama. But even those ulama have to be careful what they say. They can't have any opinions that upset the government. And so, they don't really have power. We established that under the Sharia, the ulama functioned as a separate power from the Khalifa. Yes, the Khalifa gave them legitimacy by hiring them, but they could hold him to account. They could challenge him. They could inform him what was halal and what was haram. They could stop him from changing Allah's law. All of that is not possible in the current system. Number 2, many of the freedoms that the Sharia allows don't exist today. The idea of being able to live anywhere in Darul Islam without having to worry about citizenship and passports and visas, that doesn't exist in this system. The freedom of only having to worry about God's law and living a life that is moral and pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's gone. Until 100 years ago, most Muslims didn't have to worry about the law of the land because the law of the land was Sharia. So all they had to worry about was living a life that's pleasing to Allah. Now we have to live our lives according to two sets of laws. On one hand, we have to ensure our life is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, we have to make sure that nothing we do is illegal and gets us in trouble with the government. That creates a lot of restrictions. Think about it, right? Under Sharia, there's no such thing as forced education. And I said this before and I'll say it again. I think it's really stupid that governments have so much control that in some countries they can actually put you in jail for homeschooling your children. To me, that's a ridiculous idea, that governments can put people in jail for homeschooling their children. This completely contradicts the freedom that the Sharia gives us and the power and authority that the Sharia gives to the head of the household. And this is another problem with the nation state. Because all levels of power are centralized in the government, the head of the household has lost his power. Men don't have any power in their families anymore. And feminism was a trick that they used to do this, but the goal was to make sure that the government replaces the head of the household, that there's only one power, and that's the government. And to trick women into accepting that, they invented feminism. So our freedoms are gone. In some European countries, if they even think that you are a terrorist or neglectful or abusive to your children, and their idea of neglectful or abusive is, you don't let them have girlfriends, they can literally take your children away and you'll never see your children again. And they'll give you to some gay atheist couple to be raised by them. This is tyranny. This is dictatorship. This is completely haram. And this is what I mean by the nation state system has taken away our freedoms. And people today just don't get it. Sharia gives you more freedom than the modern state system. The modern state system is tyrannical. And we just don't see it because maybe we don't want to see it, or because we bought into their lies that we have more freedom. Because really the only freedom that they have given us, that Sharia didn't give us, is the freedom to publicly sin. That's what they do. They give people the freedom to publicly sin, and that becomes their way of saying, see, you have freedom. Meanwhile, in every other aspect of your life, you don't have freedom. They're controlling everything else. And that's point number 3. Centralized government is opposed to the Sharia. The modern nation state system, the government controls too much. They really control everything. Education, banking, bureaucracy, lawmaking, travel, all of it is controlled by the government. And this system is failing. All over the world it's failing. It's made life unsustainable. Look at education. All right, look at the example of education. We did go through this before. Historically, it was passionate, learned people who were in charge of education. So they would open schools and they would shape the curriculums and they would shape the minds of people, and they were self-funded or funded by some rich person who started a waqf, and it was completely outside the control of governments. Today, education is handled by governments. They have some small budget for it. They hire the cheapest teachers they can find. They tell you what you can and you can't teach. And the average school is a mess. The average school is a joke. Why? Because instead of education being something that's passed on from passionate teacher to passionate learner, it's something that's state enforced with as minimum budget as possible, hiring the cheapest labor possible, and forced on everybody whether they want it or not. And the result is, it's not optimal at all. Governments control too much, and this is contradictory to the Sharia, where the government plays a very small role in the life of people. Under Sharia, the government actually doesn't interact with you. For the average person, just say the complete average person, the average farmer or blacksmith or school teacher, their only interaction with the government would be if they're Muslims collecting their zakah, and if they're non-Muslim collecting the jizya. And other than that, if you commit a crime, then yeah, you'll go to the qadi and you may have to face punishment. But otherwise, the government stays out of your life. That's Sharia. The government stays out of your life. Well, in modernity, they control everything. Another problem created by the nation-state system is nationalism. Muslims have moved away from being loyal to Allah to being loyal to the state. And because of this, we've lost our sense of ummah. And we've lost our sense of considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the most important. Now, on that point of loyalty to the state, historically the most important thing in the lives of people was God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even to non-Muslims. God was the most important thing in their life. In the modern world, it became the nation state. Then it became humanity. Then it became the individual. When it comes to loyalty, it's the nation state. And I want you to think outside the nation state for a second. Look at it like this, right? Under Sharia, you make jihad for the sake of Allah. Under the nation state system, you are expected in battle to die for your country. So people moved away from dying in the path of Allah to dying for their country. Likewise, under Sharia, you could be executed for apostasy, for betraying God. Under the nation-state system, you can be executed for treason, for betraying your country, for betraying the nation. Do you see how the nation has replaced God? You're no longer loyal to Allah, you're loyal to the state. You no longer die for Allah, you die for the country. You're no longer executed for betraying Allah, you executed for betraying the country. When you think outside of the nation-state system, the concept of the had for apostasy and the concept of jihad make a lot more sense. Because why should you be more loyal to a country than to God? Why should anyone be more loyal to a country than to God? A country is a made-up concept. It's a completely arbitrary made-up concept. A bunch of invisible lines drawn on a map. But you're supposed to be more loyal to that than to God. That's what they want you to do in the modern state, and that is another problem with the modern state. The next problem with the modern state is that the hudud cannot be applied. And the few attempts at applying the hudud ended up being completely incorrect, because the hudud make up a small portion of the Sharia. You need all of the Sharia for the hudud to be applied properly. But what we have today is bits and pieces. So for example, if you look at the had for stealing, right, the punishment for stealing, under Sharia, you have more freedom. Under Sharia, there's a lot more free services because of the awqaf. Under Sharia, there's a lot less excuses for stealing. Under the Sharia, if somebody steals, they will be taken to the qadi, and the qadi will try to avoid the had punishment and try to give them a lesser punishment or reconcile between the people. If the person is poor, if they were desperate, they'll try to help them out. In the modern state system, you don't have the awqaf, you don't have the free services, life is ridiculously expensive, there's no proper qadi system. So if they had to apply the had of stealing, it's taken to a government court, where the government doesn't have this qadi mindset of avoiding the hudud. They have the government mindset of making an example of people, and as a result, people's hands are chopped off for crimes where actually they should have received the ta'zir punishment instead. Really, many of the cases today where the hudud are carried out, in reality, a ta'zir should have been carried out instead, but because you have the wrong people making and applying the law ends up being applied incorrectly. It's the same things happening with the blasphemy law in Pakistan. Applied terribly, in a way that absolutely violates the Sharia. It's extremely problematic how these laws are applied in the modern world. Finally, the ulama have no control. It's one of the reasons why many ulama choose to either live in countries where there's a bit more laxity, or they tend to be a bit more undercover, where they don't become public figures, or they live in lands like the USA or South Africa where the governments don't really care what ulama are teaching their people, right? Where you have a bit more freedom. Still don't have complete freedom, but a bit more. But if you're living in a land where the government is watching and controlling everything you have to say, the ulama of those lands have absolutely no freedom. To such an extent that in some countries, the government has to approve of your Jummah khutbah. They may even hand you a Jummah khutbah to read. This is the level of control that they have over the ulama. And in this way, they completely suppress the Sharia from being applied, because the ulama are the gatekeepers of the Sharia. And if they have no control, if they have no authority, if they have no freedom, then there is no Sharia in that land. So to conclude our discussion on the impossible state, I sort of agree with Dr. Wael Hallaq that in the current system, it feels impossible to revive the Sharia. The current system gives too much power to the governments, no power to the ulama, and the Sharia is at the mercy of the government. Something has to change. A lot of work is needed. We are in a very difficult and sad situation. So I spent a lot of time this past week thinking how I'm going to end this course, because the last few modules are very depressing. Since the Sharia were dismantled over the past 200 years and we're still stuck in the situation, how do we end it on an optimistic note? Allah knows best. But for now, when it comes to the whole issue of how do we revive the Sharia, we don't really have a clear roadmap. A lot of research needs to be done. A lot of thinking needs to be done. A lot of brainstorming needs to be done. There is no clear path back to revival. And we'll talk next week about some of the attempts at revival over the past 100 years and why they failed. And we'll try to do so in a respectful manner, without trying to flare up any sectarian hate between these groups. But what do we do? Sharia was dismantled, first with colonialism, then with World War I, then with the nation-state system. Because of these three things, we don't have Sharia anywhere in the world today. Well, one could say we could still try to make it work within the nation-state system. This has failed many times, but yeah, there's a very small probability where if there was a pious king somewhere in the Muslim world, and he alters the structure of the state such that the law is now in the hands of the ulama and he will not interfere, then we can have a Sharia land somewhere in the Muslim world. But the probability of that happening right now is very low. And in the current nation-state system, it's really not possible. Reality is, it may take 100 or 200 years to revive Sharia unless Allah wills for it to happen faster. But we have to do something. We can start with education. That's the purpose of this course. Education. I realized through talking to people that most Muslims don't know what the Sharia is. They don't know what a Sharia land would look like. They have no picture in their mind of what life under Sharia looks like other than ISIS or Saudi Arabia or Iran, which is all wrong. None of those represent Sharia. So we start with education, and that's what this course has been about. And we're almost done with the course, alhamdulillah. We just have, I think, after this 3 more lessons, the revivalist movements, the modern world and its problems, and then a summary of the entire course, and then we're done. But this shouldn't stop with us. Whoever studies this should take this knowledge and pass it on to others. Let us start educating our people on what the Sharia is and what life is like under Sharia and the benefits of Sharia. This requires more research, more writing, and I do plan to write a book on this topic, inshallah, more brainstorming, more working together to figure things out. Alhamdulillah, there are people trying to do that, right? So, for example, the Umatics Institute that was founded last year by Dr. Wael Hallaq, it is trying to figure out how do we solve nationalism, how do we revive Sharia, how do we revive the Khilafat. But again, it's very theoretical at the moment. It's mostly just research and talking. It may take decades before anything concrete comes out of it. Only Allah knows best when and how the Sharia will be revived. But each of us need to do our part. And our part for now is to educate people, to educate ourselves, and to think and to plan, and to try to come up with a creative solution. And who knows, maybe as the world is changing, we'll talk about that in 2 weeks' time, modernity is failing. America is losing its power. New powers are rising. People have lost hope and faith in the modern system, in secularism, in feminism. They're looking for alternatives. Maybe this is an opportunity to bring back Sharia. And maybe it's time we start focusing on our marketing a bit better. Let's start marketing the Sharia by its features and by its benefits, instead of always being on the back foot trying to defend it. Because it may be, as we enter the age of post-modernity, we may be entering a point in time that is prime for the revival of Sharia. Because really all the problems that modernity caused over the past 100 years, we already had the solution in place for over 1,000 years. And that is the Sharia. So what's next? Allah knows best. But we all have to do something. And it starts with education, it starts with thinking, it starts with planning, it starts with da'wah, it starts somewhere. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use us to revive this religion. May He allow us to only speak the truth and to benefit from the truth. And He make us from those who understand the religion properly and who are able to convey it properly. Jazakallah khairan wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.